Let me tell you about Dr. Amara Okafor, 42 years old. Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering at Whitfield University, a private research institution in Massachusetts with a $2.8 billion endowment and an administration that had perfected the art of saying we value our faculty while doing the opposite. Amara had been at Whitfield for 8 years. 47 peer-reviewed papers. $14.2 million in federal research grants. A biomechanics lab built from an empty room into one of the top 15 facilities in the country. 31 graduate students mentored, 11 of whom now held faculty positions at major research universities. By every measure Whitfield used to evaluate tenure candidates, she was not just qualified, she was exceptional. And on a Wednesday afternoon in March, Dean Richard Alderman denied Amara's tenure application. The stated reason was institutional language wrapped around a lie. Insufficient scholarly impact. The actual reason, confirmed through 3 separate sources within 48 hours, was simpler. Richard had already promised her tenure line to Dr. Nathan Cross, his former doctoral student. 1/3 of Amara's publication record. 0 grant funding. 1 qualification that mattered to Richard. Loyalty. What Richard did not know, what he had never checked in 8 years, was that the university's largest active research grant sat on a patent. A patent filed by Amara, under her own name. The patent covered a biomechanical scaffold technology underlying a $300 million federal research grant, the largest in Whitfield's history. And it belonged to Amara, personally, entirely, because Whitfield's Technology Transfer Office had failed to exercise its institutional claim within the required 90-day window. And the dean who denied her tenure had never once asked who owned the intellectual property his institution's flagship research program depended on. This is the story of how one tenure denial became the most expensive administrative decision in Whitfield University's history, and how a quiet professor used the patent she already owned to remind an institution that brilliance is not a renewable resource. Buckle up, because this twist was filed with the USPTO, and it had Amara's name on it. The story started 3 years before the tenure denial. That was when Amara developed the scaffold technology. The breakthrough was elegant. A biocompatible structure that supported bone regeneration faster, with fewer rejection events, and a manufacturing process simple enough to scale commercially. Amara recognized immediately that it was patentable. She also recognized something else. Whitfield's IP policy contained a specific provision, Section 4.3. For inventions arising from federally funded research, the university retained the right to assert institutional ownership by filing a formal claim within 90 days of the inventor's disclosure. If no claim was filed within that period, ownership defaulted to the faculty inventor. Amara filed her invention disclosure on a Tuesday. She noted the date. She waited. 90 days passed. No claim from the Technology Transfer Office, no email, no form, no acknowledgement. Because the office was 2 people managing 340 active disclosures, and the budget request to hire additional staff had been denied by the dean's office 3 years in a row. On day 91, Amara filed the patent under her own name. Legally, cleanly, per Section 4.3. She did not hide it. The filing appeared in her faculty activity report. It appeared in the university research database. Nobody noticed, because nobody was looking. The tenure review should have been routine. Amara's file was extraordinary. 5 external review letters, all glowing. Department committee, 7-1 in favor. College committee, 5-2 in favor. Provost's office, no concerns. Then it reached Richard's desk. Richard had 1 tenure line. Amara was in it. Nathan needed it. So Richard wrote his assessment. While Dr. Okafor's contributions are noted, the candidate's research trajectory does not yet demonstrate the sustained impact required for tenure at Whitfield's level. He sent the denial letter on a Wednesday. Amara read it in her lab. She did not cry, did not call anyone, did not make a scene. She pulled up the patent filing. Status, active. Sole inventor, Amara Okafor. Then she called her attorney, David Kim, intellectual property law, 12 years of university patent disputes. They denied my tenure, she said. Did they give a real reason? David asked. Insufficient scholarly impact, Amara said. 47 papers, $14.2 million in grants. Top 15 lab. David was quiet for a moment. And the $300 million grant, he asked, runs on my patent, Amara said, which I own. Do they know that? David asked. They have never asked, Amara said. David exhaled. If you leave Whitfield, or if you revoke the university's implied license, the grant becomes legally complicated very quickly. I know, Amara said. I want what I earned. Tenure, recognition. and a guarantee that Nathan Cross does not take my position because the dean owes him a favor. Then we make sure they understand what they are about to lose, Davis said. Davis' letter arrived at Provost Margaret Liu's office on a Friday morning, not the dean's office. Above Richard, deliberately, it outlined the patent, filing date, ownership, Section 4.3 compliance, sole inventor status. It outlined the 300 million grant, its dependence on the patented technology, and the licensing implications if the patent holder was no longer affiliated with the institution. It outlined the tenure denial, the committee votes in favor, the external reviews, and the dean's override. And it made one thing unmistakably clear. If Amara left Whitfield, the patent went with her. The grant would face an IP compliance crisis that could trigger federal review, a funding freeze, and the kind of institutional embarrassment that donors notice. Margaret read the letter. Call the Technology Transfer Office. One question. Who owns the patent on the scaffold technology? The answer came back in 12 minutes. Dr. Okafor, personally, Section 4.3, we never filed the institutional claim. Margaret closed her eyes, called the university general counsel, then called Richard. The meeting was in Margaret's office. Margaret, Richard, General Counsel Thomas Ashford, and the Vice President of Research. Margaret placed the letter on the table. Richard, walk me through the tenure denial. Richard delivered his prepared explanation. Margaret let him finish. Then she said it plainly. The external reviewers rated her exceptional. The department voted 7-1. The college committee voted 5-2. The provost's office flagged nothing. You overrode all of it. That is within my authority, Richard said. It is, Margaret said. Now explain the timing of your conversations with Nathan Cross. Because I have emails from your office, sent before Amara's review was complete, discussing the anticipated opening in the department. Thomas Ashford looked at Richard the way lawyers look at clients who have just made everything more expensive. Richard, Thomas said carefully, did you commit a tenure line to Dr. Cross before Dr. Okafor's review was finalized? I had preliminary conversations, Richard said. That is standard practice. Not when the line is occupied by a candidate under active review, Margaret said. And not when that candidate owns the patent underlying our 300 million grant. The room went still. She owns the patent, Richard asked. Margaret nodded. Section 4.3, Thomas said. The Technology Transfer Office never filed the institutional claim. Ownership defaulted to Dr. Okafor. Richard looked like a man watching his career fall down a staircase. What does that mean for the grant? He asked. If Dr. Okafor leaves, the patent goes with her, Thomas said. The grant framework references the patent. The federal agency would require an amended IP disclosure. In the worst case, they freeze funding pending review. The Vice President of Research spoke next. 6 partner institutions, 14 active subawards. This does not stop with us if it unravels. Richard put his hands on the table. I did not know she owned the patent, he said quietly. Margaret looked at him. That, she said, is precisely the problem. The resolution took 3 weeks. Margaret handled it personally. Amara's terms, through David, were precise. Immediate tenure approval, effective retroactively to the original review date. Promotion to full professor within 12 months through expedited review. An endowed chair, the Okafor Chair in Biomedical Innovation, funded from the dean's discretionary budget. Lab expansion, and a dedicated budget line independent of departmental allocation. A formal written acknowledgement from the provost's office that the tenure denial was inconsistent with the faculty review process and unsupported by the evidentiary record. Nathan Cross to be handled through a separate, properly constituted search, not through Amara's tenure line. Thomas confirmed the terms were reasonable and far less expensive than the alternative. The board approved within a week. Amara received her tenure notification on a Monday morning. She was in her lab when the email arrived. She read it, set down her coffee, looked around the room she had built from nothing, then went back to work. Because the scaffold research was not going to advance itself. Richard Alderman remained dean for 4 more months before accepting an emeritus transition that nobody in the department believed was voluntary. His replacement, the first woman to hold a position in the engineering school's history, made her first act a full review of the Technology Transfer Office. She tripled the staffing budget. Implemented a mandatory 90-day claim tracking system. She called it, informally, the Okafor audit. Nathan Cross was offered a position at Whitfield, through a legitimate search, in a different department, on a separate tenure line. He turned out to be a perfectly competent researcher when given the chance to succeed on his own merits. Thomas Ashford implemented a mandatory IP ownership review for all faculty under tenure consideration. A 30-minute check that would have prevented the entire disaster. And the 300 million grand continued, uninterrupted. Because the woman who owned the patent that made it possible was still in the building. Still in her lab. Still advancing research that could change how the world treated bone injuries. Just now with her name on the door. And on the patent. And on the chair. They say Richard still attends faculty receptions at Whitfield, stands in the back. Avoids the engineering building. They say Margaret Liu, at her first faculty address, said one thing everyone in the room understood was about Amara without her name being mentioned. This university does not succeed because of its buildings or its endowment. It succeeds because of the people who do the work. And our job is to make sure we never confuse the institution's interests with any individual's convenience. Amara was in the audience. She did not react. She just wrote it down. The way she writes everything down. And that, my friends, is how one professor turned a tenure denial into the most expensive administrative lesson in Whitfield University's history. Without a lawsuit, without a leak, and without once letting anyone forget that the most valuable thing in the building was the research, not the politics. Because some people play academic politics. And some people own the patent that makes the politics irrelevant. Amara knew which one she was. Richard found out 3 weeks too late. If this story moved you, subscribe to Tangled Stories, drop a like, and share this with every researcher who has ever been denied recognition for work that speaks for itself. Because here, every story has a twist. And sometimes that twist is filed with a USPTO. I am Brett, and I will see you in the next one.